SNAICC advises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that the following episode of Kids, Culture, Community, SNAICC Yarns contains references to topics that may be triggering to the community. Your social and emotional safety is important. If this recording has brought up any concerns for you, please contact 13Yarn on 139276.
Welcome everyone to our first special introductory SNAICC podcast. We're so happy you can join us. My name's Mandy Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of the CEO at SNAICC. Big title, basically what it means is I work to make sure my boss has got everything she needs to do her job. Talking of my boss, I'd like to introduce her, SNAICC CEO Catherine Liddle.
Hey, Mandy, and I guess people know who I am as the CEO, but maybe you don't know where I'm from, and that would be the heart of Alice Springs, Mbuntua, being an Mbunda in your person, but I also on my grandmother's side, and at the side of which I follow a lot of my stories, takes me out into the Pradama and Maangadara lands. So that takes you through Wataka National Park and Uluru, which is the land of those beautiful sandhills and the beautiful rivers and the beautiful desert oaks. Nice to be with you.
Thanks, Catherine. And as you know, I'm lucky enough to make my home in Ubuntu, Alice Springs as well. Lucky enough to live and work and be with my family on these beautiful lands of the Aranda Nation. And can I ask you to give our acknowledgement of country, please?
Absolutely. So for this particular episode, I'm going to acknowledge that I'm sitting on the lands of the Wurundjeri mob here in Naarm, part of that great Kulin Nation. It is a beautiful day. And if you could see out my window, you'd be looking at a slightly overcast day. And I tell you what, every time I look at that overcast day, I actually think it's hauntingly beautiful. It's one of my favourite seasons of the day. You know how they say Melbourne has 4 seasons in a day? This is the one that makes me just sit down and just be. I just be when it's haunting like this.
There's something about Naarm in that early autumn, but let me ground you to where I am. And I'm, of course, in Ubuntu, Alice Springs. And as I look out my window, it is the most beautiful big blue sky. And we've been lucky enough to have a little bit of rain recently. So we've got the big blue sky. Everything is green and fresh. The wildflowers are starting to bloom. A little bit of water in the water holes have been topped up. It was a long, hot summer, as you know, Catherine. Mm-hmm. And you know what it's like at home after rain. So beautiful. And it also demonstrates, look, you're in Naarm, in Mbuntua, SNAICC truly is a national organisation.
Yeah, incredible, hey? Incredible.
Now, I thought we might start off with, I'm sure most people are pretty familiar with SNAICC and they know who we are and what we do. But for those who don't, maybe we should talk a little bit about what SNAICC does, Catherine, and how we do it and where we do it.
Oh, wow. You know what? I never know where to start on this journey, so why don't I start at the start? SNAICC was stood up around in the 1980s, and it was stood up by our incredible medical services and legal services and our incredible communities who were basically saying, when we look at what's happening in Australia, we've got to put children first, and we know that some of the worst policies ever designed in Australia, ever implemented in Australia related to children. We've got to find a way to put those children front and centre. We need all these great services around us, but until we have a voice that can take the stories of our children, the aspirations of our families and our communities to government, to think differently about how they work with our communities, how you keep families strong and safe, we're going to continue to have this problem. So they came up with the peak body, SNAICC, the Secretariat of National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Childcare. Oh my goodness, What an incredible name. Very, very synergetic with the 1980s. And I often reflect on that because time has changed and changed in so many ways. These days, as most of you would know, we're known as the national voice for our children. And that was really a recognition that the journey had changed and how we even use language is changing. So that's what we do these days. We keep pace with what is happening and forecast what might be coming. We do that in multiple ways. One, we have 3 arms of business. The first is, and in no particular order, the first would be our policy arm. You might be all familiar with that. It's been around for a very long time. A lot of you would know the work that they did to get up the Royal Commission into the stolen generations. A lot of you would know the work that they've done consistently to fight for better legislation around access to early education and care, better access to the child placement principle, pushing for that to be legislated, the Aboriginal child placement principle. So incredible pieces of work in there. But as we've grown and evolved, we've been able to look at how we might do things differently. And our sector leaned in and it said, listen, we've got these incredible services, but we need a different way to come together. Can we start looking at a backbone, a type of backbone operation that we can reach into and reach out of whenever we need to help us really concentrate on what we need to do, and that is delivering services for our children. So our programs arm is now up and running, and it does our front-facing work. It is as big as our policy arm these days, and a lot of you on the ground, if you are in services, you'll come into contact with that team. That team has been extraordinary in the deployment of incredible backbone programs like Connected Beginnings. They've started on the transfer of service delivery for early education and care services that might have been hosting the Connected Beginnings framework into the Aboriginal community controlled sector. They're on the ground constantly working with communities on better ways to identify things like those really pointy things like child sexual abuse, how we work in a way that protects our families. They bring that voice in consistently. And one of the comments I heard very recently that speaks to how successful they were came from a fellow peak body who said, listen, we've got to have a chat to SNAICC as the largest and most successful backbone provider in the country. And that really was a moment to sit back and reflect and go, wow, great work, Yimob, great work. And as you identified, Mandy, right in the middle we have the Office of the CEO. And that piece of work sits across the whole business and says, well, how do we translate? How do we tell people this story? Of what SNAICC does? How do we communicate with our communities? How do we communicate with our politicians? How do we communicate with stakeholders? And it does a lot of the thinking about how we could talk differently, speak differently. And of course, it includes our incredible comms team, but also our incredible backbone teams as well. One of the things we've learned as we've been growing is the truth of the matter is, and I think you picked up on it a little bit earlier on, all of these arms need each other. And it is incredible to know that our sector now has those arms to wrap around them.
It is, Catherine, and I just love the work that programs do because they are the ones that hit the ground. They connect us to the work that's happening at the grassroots. They connect us to the children. And I just love going out on the ground with our programs team. But also, as you said, I wanted to pick up on that because you're a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
My background, as you know, is all about storytelling in some way, shape or form as well. And I think that's what SNAICC does really well, is tries to tell the story. And it's interesting with the name as well. You know, you talked about the acronym. Now we're known as SNAICC, National Voice for Our Children. Often when I go out there and people say, hey, who do you work for? And I go, I work for SNAICC, the National Voice for Our Children. And people can look at you a little bit odd and go, what's SNAICC? But, you know, it reminds me all the time. I remember hearing you tell this story a few times, and it says that the snakes aren't just scary, you know, creatures. snakes are real protectors.
Oh yeah, they are. They as totems, they were incredible. They are our change makers. Snakes change the world, and there are a couple of snake stories that go through my country, and I often share them with mob. And one relates to Wanampi, the rainbow serpent. Now he is remarkable. He's scary. I mean, he's bright and he's beautiful, and he brings these incredible storm fronts that churn up the earth, that create the rivers, that nurture the trees. That ensure that we have enough water that for our animals to drink. But in doing that, they change the landscape, and they change the landscape forever. That's when you know it's Wanampi. If the landscape changes forever, that was Wanampi. And they teach you these incredible stories about how to respond to transformation, is the modern word for it, but how you respond to change, and an understanding that big changes have happened in our country for thousands and thousands of years. And we've always understood as Aboriginal people that it is much easier to convey those messages in story because you remember them. And when you hit a moment in time when those big serpents might be moving, you can understand it better. You know this is something that you get through. It is sometimes a little bit scary because change is always a little bit uncomfortable, but there's always a way through it. And we know that at the end of it, we'll find a different way through. And as you said, one of the other big ones that my family is very, very connected to, and this sits with my nana's side, we refer to ourselves as belonging to the kunia. And that kunia, if you've ever been to Uluru, is the giant snake that wraps around the base there. And the kunia's job was to protect children. You know, she's moved the earth to protect her children. She's gouged new rivers. She's moved at speed. She's created mountains, all to protect her children. And ultimately, she, in fighting for children, loses her babies. And the pain of that loss means that she's forever frozen. And she's forever sitting at the base of that beautiful, beautiful monolith. And she stands as a reminder of what women will do, of what we will do as protectors of our children, and how we'll always protect our children, how we are fierce. But she also reminds us of the incredible risks we have in raising children. She also reminds us of the pain that comes when you lose a child, because in the old days, and it was one of the stories that my nana used to tell us at night time, was, you'd go to Uluru and you'd sing out to the kunia, you'd say, kapiei, kapiei. And that beautiful, beautiful serpent, she would squeeze that rock and down would come the water. And it was how you knew you were a T.O. That's how you knew you were a T.O. And you'd be able to drink that water, but then you ran away, and you ran away really quickly because, poor thing, she was damaged. She was damaged, and because she was damaged, you might get hurt. And again, I think it tells us there are so many stories embedded in that story that we understand today. And in my brain, I translate that and transfer that to the type of work that I do at SNAICC. So in many ways, I often wonder if it was that kunia that said, see that organisation over there? That might be the right one for you because you belong to me.
And what a beautiful way of putting it as well, Catherine, and linking it to that serpent story is the snake story. In so many ways, so many layers of the story, so illustrative of the work that we do with children. Now, this is going to be a bit of a cheeky link, but we've been talking about snakes, and now I'm going to talk about politics.
Not so cheeky.
Yeah, because you and I, a lot of the work that we do is about getting in those rooms and talking to politicians about the work that SNAICC does, and you talk to them about why it is so important that politicians back the work of SNAICC. They back the work that is led by and determined by Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal families. So, and of course, now we're in an election period.
Yeah.
There's going to be an election in a couple of weeks. Thought it might be a good idea to talk about what SNAICC is prioritising and what we're calling for. from the result of this election, because going into it, you and I have talked a lot, where the team's talked a lot about there's so many people who are looking at Aboriginal children in election contexts and maybe not in a really good lens. And I really like how you talk about, not making Aboriginal children political footballs. And, we need those bipartisan commitments, don't we?
Bipartisan commitments are fundamental. I think it's, again, when you reflect on recent movements, the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, that was all about saying you can't keep bouncing us from election to election. You can't keep kicking us whenever you think that you need a headline, whenever you think that you need a bit of populist boost. And it was at an extraordinary time when all governments came together, right? All colours of government, all layers of government came together and said, you know what, we really do need to move some things, and the only way to move them would be to genuinely work together. And as you say, I'm a storyteller, and I've been reflecting on the journey of that national agreement, which, at the heart of lays our children, because we know closing the gap starts with our children. If you've got, and Aboriginal communities have known it forever, if you have strong children, then you have a strong community. Everything is working together. And I was thinking about how do you describe this? What does this stuff mean? If you don't work and live and breathe it, it sounds so abstract. So how do you explain those things? And I often think about it when I'm sitting in the plains, and essentially what we have is a plane that was built in partnership with Aboriginal people and all those governments. And we said, look, if we're going to be able to look up and look around at everything that's around us and be able to start bringing it together, then we need to build this plane together, and we need to be flying it together. And again, when you're in a plane, you'd all know you get bumped a little bit and you get pushed around a little bit, and they're the different winds that come in. And election cycles very much represent those winds that are bumping that plane around. And sometimes they're little tiny bumps that make your coffee move just a little bit, and sometimes they're those bumps that make your stomach drop. And that's one of the things with elections, right? They could be a little bump, or they can be that heart-stopping moment when you think, I don't know what's coming. And unfortunately, we have to be honest. Some of those election cycles previous to this one have been a bit ugly, and they've been ugly when it comes to our children, because instead of picking our children up and nurturing, instead of going that distance that says we will do anything to protect children as a community, they genuinely have said, let's kick you over here, let's kick you over there, let's respond to this narrative of this increasing crime wave. Let's respond to this narrative of Aboriginal families don't look after their children, when all the evidence says that story is wrong, when all the evidence shows that in actual fact across the nation crime rates have been dropping, when all the evidence shows that when you invest in your families, they have strong, safe children. When you invest in your Aboriginal community-controlled solutions, we have this incredible ability to wrap around our families, bring them along on this journey that celebrates how remarkable they are, how strong they are, and yet it gets overridden by an easy narrative that says crime is out of control, let's lock children up, let's take more children away. So when you're flying that plane through those winds, it gets a little bit scary sometimes, and it takes a fair bit of energy to be trusting that the plane is strong enough, that the pilots have got the right line of sight. So it's why we need bipartisan support, because unless those pilots are all flying that plane together, it's going to have a really rocky time of finishing that flight successfully. So this is that moment where we have to really lean in and go, on this election, this federal election, which is the piece that ties everything together, encourage with all your might and all your heart your leaders to genuinely care about children, to genuinely step up to what leadership means. And that means investing in those things that stop the harm, that make families strong, and that show that you genuinely care about children. by listening to your communities and investing in your communities.
You often say, Catherine, that closing the gap starts with our children, that it should come above politics. We know that sometimes it doesn't. So what are those particular things that you want to see everyone, every politician, every party get behind that will make a difference?
Oh, look, the first one is just stop it. Just stop kicking the football. Stop it. These are children. If you truly care about children, then invest in what keeps them safe and strong. Those are the things that mean children are connected to their families, so fundamental to identity and success. Invest in those things that keeps families strong. Invest in those things that mean our children, like any other child in the country, is able to go through early education and care, have a successful transition into school, be protected in school, celebrate their learning journeys, and then be strong enough to enter the world into any career path or choice that they might need. Now, we know that starts with those incredible investments into early education and care, those incredible Aboriginal organisations that we have out there that wrap around our services. It means investing in solutions and programs that are developed and designed by communities on the ground because they know what keeps their children strong and connected. It means ensuring that we're not having silly conversations about removing children, but rather talking to families about what keeps them strong. And, we know that if you have a house to live in, we know that if you have food on the table, we know that if your families have the opportunity to engage in the workforce, we know that if your children are able to walk into school strong and ready to learn, culturally strong in their identity, the trajectory and the story changes dramatically, and it changes fast. The problem we have is every 3 to 4 years, somebody wants to reinvent that journey.
That's true, and suddenly we're having to do a 360 or a donut and head down a different road. And as you said, it might be a road with great big potholes in it. Might be a road that's not properly formed because people haven't taken the time to look at the evidence, to look at what works, and to listen to the voices of the communities and of our children. But I wanted to say something as well. Before the election was called, we did have the budget, and there were a couple of positive measures in the budget. We like to give credit where credit's due.
Absolutely.
I don't know about you, Catherine, but I was really pleased to hear the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, reference childcare, early education and care so strongly. He's acknowledged its importance, and I guess that commitment to reforming, that $5 billion commitment to reforming early education and care that was in the budget is a really important foundation that will help shift the dial. Now, that wraps up some of the funding that will go to our services, to ACCO services. But I guess the big one was the abolishing the childcare activity test, hey?
Yeah, oh my goodness. Who'd have ever thought we'd be saying that? And it was an election commitment. We will get rid of the activity test. And if I reflect on all the rooms that I go into, particularly those with early education and care representatives in them, and you start having a conversation about what some of the challenges were, there wasn't a single room that you walked into where they didn't identify the activity test. And again, SNAICC's on record at the time that particular policy was announced as objecting. The team took it to Parliament. They actually stood up in Parliament and said, this is going to harm our families. This was designed without talking to our families about why it is so important that you don't block our children from being able to access early education and care when they need it. Because we know that those are children that get the support, that families get the support that they need. So to see it finally announced was just remarkable. I think, again, it speaks to something that we know about advocacy, and that is if the message is consistent, if the message is constant, then there will come a time when, if I go back to that plane, there'll be a break in the clouds, and it's being ready to use that moment to bring it to life. And the budget announcements that said we're going to invest in early education and care, and I think even the Treasurer used very similar words to the ones we use. I'm pretty certain he said, we know it starts in early education. We know strong children start in early education, and we know a strong community starts there. I'm paraphrasing it, so it sounds more like something I'd say, but it was very, very similar. And I actually wondered, did we pinch his message or did he pinch ours?
Oh, hey, I reckon you know that you're doing something right when you hear politicians starting to use your language.
I think so.
So good on you. Good on you for getting them to use your words. But there is another real biggie for us, and you know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to talk about, don't you?
I do.
The National Commissioner.
Oh, wow. Wow. Decades and decades and decades of advocacy. There isn't a single report that didn't identify that there was an accountability problem in how governments were responding to our children and families, and that until we had an accountability mechanism that was available and able to shine a light into the deepest recesses and find out what was going on, we would always be struggling to get the right policies and the right frameworks and the right investments into our communities. Now, it's a funny thing when you talk about shining a light. It's easy to think that you're only talking about really pointy things, but think of it this way. You go into your bedroom and you're trying to find your shoes and you can't see anything. You can't find them. The moment you turn your light on, you can see it. And so sometimes it's really just going, why didn't that program work? Why are children having trouble at this point in time? Oh, I see it. There was a simple light switch that needed to be turned on. And now we can work together. And again, what's different between a national commissioner, now let me be really clear, a national, fully empowered, fully legislated national commissioner was the promise. If that is there, it is fully independent. It has powers to genuinely investigate, but moreover, it is highly flexible. That commissioner can hit the ground and work not only with community, but alongside government to bring out change and bring about change really, really quickly. It doesn't require another 4 years of investigation. It doesn't cost a lot of money in the scheme of things, but what it does is change things for children almost immediately.
Exactly. And we're seeing some really strong commitments coming out in this election campaign for children. Of course, we've got the Greens, who have just recently announced their early education and care policies and priorities. You know, their promise is to make free childhood education care a priority. Some significant reforms there as well. They include a dedicated fund for childcare deserts, and they've, for us, some really welcome news that the Greens have promised additional support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled services, including looking at, exciting for us, the new funding model that, as you know, SNAICC has done so much work on, and also looking at investing into developing and growing the early childhood education workforce, because, we can't have great services without having great workers.
Absolutely. And you know how I said, most of the rooms I went into would bring up the activity test. They also bring up workforce. Without fail, people are saying, where is our workforce? Where is our opportunity to train new people? Where are the pathways that our communities need out on communities that potentially aren't in a major city? That sometimes people really like those shiny lights of the big cities, but out in the regions, those country, that sort of country that I like to speak for, people aren't lining up to work there. So how do we grow our own? How do we invest in a workforce that is specific to that region? How do we encourage others to step up to the plate? There's a way to do all of this, and our community-controlled organisations and all of our community reference groups that SNAICC works with, they have incredible ideas about how they might do it. And again, when I look at some of those incredible things that are coming as part of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, while they sound really boring, policy partnerships, they actually are about moving moving the pieces to make sure that the plane can keep flying. And one of those will relate to further education, higher education and training. And almost immediately, what people are talking about is, well, how do we ensure everyone's able to access the type of training that they might need? And how do we make sure that that training is nuanced to the environment that they need? And how do we recognise what the workforce that Aboriginal community controlled services need is? So in many ways, it's a really, really exciting time.
It is really exciting. And Catherine, hearing you talk, you're talking about the planes and the work that happens inside those policy partnerships. I just want to start singing that Bette Midler song, "You Are the Wings Beneath My Wings." I
Well,
won't, because you know how terrible my singing is.
Yeah, don't tempt me. But it's true. And when you think about the wind beneath the wings, that is the voice of our children. That is the voice of our communities. Without those voices, there is no friction on that plane to keep it glued in place so it's able to withstand any of the little bumps that it might take or any of the big drops that might come along, because sometimes they happen. And, without that consistent voice, that consistent message from our communities, it would be much harder to fly that plane.
Oh, Catherine, we're flying the plane into an election. A couple of weeks, we'll probably know who the new government's going to be.
Yeah.
Now, Snake, we never tell people how to vote, of course. Your vote is yours.
Yep.
But if you had a message for people when they're thinking about how to cast their vote, what would you say to them?
What would I say to them? Invest in what's important to you. Reach out to your politicians, reach out to your leadership and ask them, how are you investing in children in my region? How are you ensuring that you're responding to the needs of my unique community? How are you ensuring that we're investing in the right places and that we're not talking about pointy things, but rather celebrating what is good in my community? How are you leading my community and how are you going to step up?
I think they're really good points. And if I could just make one too, I think vote like our kids depend on it.
Yeah,
because I reckon they do.
I might pinch that one. I'm going to pinch. If you
You're
might hear me,
welcome.
if you might hear me saying that, I pinched it off Mandy.
You're very welcome to it, Catherine. Hey, thanks. This is our first ever Snake podcast.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I've got so much more I want to tell you. Do I get another invite?
Oh, probably.
Oh,
I
that's good.
reckon you would.
I'll break into song that time.
No, that's worth listening to, sort of.
Yeah.
We won't say you think you sound like Kate Sobrano, but
Yeah,
let's just leave it at that.
God,
Yeah.
I look like Kate Sobrano. I don't know if I sound like her, but speaking about those planes, I've got to be honest. I was having a bit of trouble the other day, and turned out I left and this will come as no surprise to anyone who knows me, could not find where I'd put my headphones, and the only thing left to do was sing to myself. I was going to serenade myself for that whole flight, and the only song I could come up with was "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." And I don't know if you might know that language, but I always take these things as messages. And it was, the devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to sell. He was in a bind. He was out of time. He was willing to make a deal. And I'm curious about why that message. So I suspect the next time I talk to you, Mob, I'll know why my brain singled in on that story.
There you go. And I'm pretty glad I wasn't sitting next to you on that flight.
We'll see. We'll see how I actualise that one.
Hey, thanks a lot, Catherine. And we'll speak to you, Mob, again real soon.